Most people assume that once you grow up, your childhood stops shaping you. That time smooths everything out, that whatever environment you came from eventually fades into the background. But psychology shows something very different. The world you grow up in doesn't just give you memories. It calibrates your nervous system. It quietly trains your expectations, your instincts, and the way you interpret reality. And if you ever feel like modern life is louder, faster, and more fragile than it should be, there's probably a reason for that. Not because you're resistant to change, not because you're nostalgic, and definitely not because you're broken, but because your mind was trained in a different kind of environment, one that no longer exists in the same way. You grew up in a world where boredom was normal, where there were long stretches of unstructured time and no constant stimulation to fill every empty moment. That boredom didn't damage you. It forced your mind to stretch, to imagine, to invent, to tolerate silence. Today, boredom is treated like a problem that needs to be fixed immediately. But back then, boredom was a training ground. It taught you how to be alone with your thoughts without panicking. You also grew up in a world where mistakes weren't documented forever. There was no permanent record, no screenshots, no audience waiting to judge every misstep. If you embarrassed yourself, it lived only in the memories of the people who were there, and then it faded. That gave you something most people struggle to develop today: the freedom to experiment without fear of permanent consequences. You learned that failure wasn't identity, it was information. Your environment rewarded independence early. You figured things out because you had to, not because someone told you to, and not because an app guided you step by step, but because real life required it. When something didn't work, you didn't immediately outsource the problem. You stayed with it. You tried again. You learned through friction. That built a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't announce itself but shows up when things go wrong. You also learned cause and effect in a very direct way. Actions had weight. Choices had outcomes that were immediate and tangible, not abstract, not theoretical. That kind of wiring doesn't disappear. It becomes part of how you navigate the world. You expect reality to respond honestly. And when modern systems feel disconnected from consequences, it creates a sense of disorientation that's hard to explain to people who didn't grow up that way. You were trained for patience without realizing it. Waiting was normal. Missing out was normal. If you weren't there when something happened, it happened without you. There was no replay, no rewind. That taught you presence in a way no mindfulness exercise ever could. You learned early on that some moments only come once, and because of that, you learned how to pay attention. Your relationship with knowledge was different too. Information wasn't instant. It wasn't infinite. If you wanted to know something, you had to work for it. You had to remember it. You had to carry it in your own mind. That trained focus, deep focus, the kind that lets you stay with one idea long enough to actually understand it. In a world that now rewards skimming and constant switching, that depth can feel like a disadvantage, but it isn't. It's a rare skill. Social life worked differently as well. Identity wasn't something you curated online. It was something you embodied in physical space. You couldn't hide behind filters or carefully selected posts. If you chose a style, a tribe, or a role, you had to live it in real time. You learned to read rooms, to sense energy, to understand unspoken rules. Those instincts don't come from screens. They come from presence. You also learned responsibility earlier than most people today. Not the symbolic kind, but the real kind. People depended on you. Tasks had to be completed whether you felt like it or not. You learned how to show up when no one was watching. That kind of discipline doesn't feel exciting, but it builds something powerful: self-trust. The belief that you can be relied on, even when things are uncomfortable. At the same time, you had freedom that's almost unimaginable now. Long stretches without supervision, space to be messy, space to try on different versions of yourself without constant evaluation. That privacy allowed your identity to form internally instead of being shaped by feedback loops. You learned who you were before the world told you who you should be. And this combination of independence, patience, consequence, and privacy created something subtle but important: an internal compass, a way of navigating uncertainty without needing constant validation, a trust in your own judgment. That compass didn't come from instruction. It came from experience. So when you look at the modern world and feel like something is off, It's not because you can't adapt. It's because the environment has changed faster than the systems that shaped you. Today's world is optimized for speed, visibility, and performance. But you were trained for depth, durability, and self-direction. Those two systems don't always speak the same language. That's why you might feel out of place in spaces that reward constant self-promotion. Why endless notifications feel invasive instead of helpful. Why shallow engagement feels exhausting instead of energizing. Your nervous system isn't malfunctioning. It's responding exactly as it was trained to. And here's the important reframe. You are not outdated. You are not behind. You are carrying capabilities that are becoming rare. The ability to focus deeply. The ability to tolerate discomfort. The ability to think independently. The ability to act without applause. These aren't weaknesses in a fast world. They're stabilizers. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who can stay grounded when systems fail. People who don't panic when things break. People who can navigate uncertainty without outsourcing every decision. That quiet strength you carry didn't come from nostalgia. It came from training. So if modern life feels overwhelming, don't rush to fix yourself. Pause long enough to recognize what you're actually feeling. You're not struggling because you lack something. You're struggling because you were built for a different rhythm, and that rhythm still has value. You learned how to live without constant input. You learned how to trust your gut when there was no map. You learned how to move through the world without needing permission at every step. Those skills didn't disappear. They're still there. And in a world that's increasingly dependent on systems it doesn't understand, that kind of grounding is not obsolete. It's essential. You don't need to become louder to belong here. You don't need to perform more to be relevant. You don't need to trade depth for speed. You just need to understand the source of your calibration. Because once you do, the confusion lifts. And what replaces it isn't superiority or bitterness. It's clarity. You're not incompatible with this world. You were simply trained somewhere else. And that perspective is more valuable than you've been led to believe.